Hey guys, it's your girl Etta. Aside from being the Let's Talk Paralegal podcast host, I am a legal consultant, author, and advocate for change within the legal industry. Every episode, we dive deep into the tools, strategies, and real world insights you need to succeed, featuring inspiring guests and topics that matter most to the modern legal profession. So, if you find value in these conversations, be sure to subscribe to the Let's Talk Paralegal podcast and download our episodes for your commute, coffee break, or brainstorming session. And if you know someone who could benefit, don't forget to send them our way. Referrals are always welcome. Let's create a stronger, more empowered legal industry together. In this episode, I get to speak with Nikki Black, where we dissect the dazzling realm where AI meets law, a realm that's as revolutionary as it is essential. Join us as we unpack why understanding and wisely adopting AI isn't just tech talk, but a fundamental shift from modern law firms. Prepare for a candid, clever, and creative exploration of legal innovation, where every bite of tech meets the nuanced world of paralegal practice. Listen in for more. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Let's Talk Paralegal podcast. I'm here with Nikki Black. I've been a long-term fan of a lot of softwares in my life, but I have to say that my case was probably the first one that I was introduced to early on in my independent career. So I was, as you guys know, I was a paralegal for 15 plus years. I'm not going to say exactly. No, I'm kidding. For 15 plus years, I litigated a lot of files, and most of the firms used a variety of software and a variety of platforms. And no, by no means am I getting sponsored by my case. I just honestly love my case. And so I did a little bit of research. And since I'm on the AI train right now and legal tech, and I'm all about innovation and reshaping and redefining the walls and the structures around the legal industry, I said, I'm going to reach out to Nikki, which is like the legal tech guru of my case. So it's kind of like a perfect merge. So welcome to the podcast. I'm so excited that you accepted my invitation. We are closing out the season with you, so congratulations. You're the winner. But introduce yourself, kind of give us your background, because you do have an interesting background. So let's talk about that.
Yeah, sure. My name is Nikki Black, as you said. I'm an attorney. I practiced law for over a decade here in Rochester, New York. I started in the public defender's office and was there for a number of years, and then I went to a civil litigation firm where I handled a lot of insurance defense and plaintiffs work, employment discrimination, and also continued to do criminal defense work. And then after that, I worked in a number of different capacities, I guess you could say. I hung a shingle doing contract work for other lawyers after I'd taken a couple of years off after I had my first daughter. And then from there, I ended up becoming of counsel to a DWI defense firm in Rochester. And then I also, at the time that I sort of hung my own shingle and created a website, at that time, I also started my blog, Sui Generis, a New York law blog, and that was in 2005. And sort of where I've ended up all began with that blog. Initially, when I was blogging, since my target audience was other attorneys, I was writing about appellate cases as they came down in New York. But because I was blogging, I wrote an article for the local legal newspaper, the Daily Record, and also for the Bar Association about blogging for lawyers to help lawyers understand the benefits of blogging. And also because I was blogging, I was connecting with the handful of other lawyers that were blogging at the time. So I met people nationally that were involved in tech. And from that, my path led to where I am. So I started writing about all different other types of tech as it came down, both on my blog and also for the Daily Record, because they'd asked me to write a column. So I was writing about social media for lawyers, mobile computing, and then cloud computing when that came along. And I also had started speaking and getting asked to speak at conferences and uh, meeting people that I'd met online in real life. And from that, Carolyn Elephant, who is an attorney in the DC area, who wrote Solo by Choice. It's a book to help lawyers start their own solo practices. She was under contract with the ABA in 2009, I think it was, to write a book about social media for lawyers. And she asked me if I wanted to help co-author it with her so that she could meet her deadline. And so I wrote co-authored that book for her that the ABA published in 2010. I pitched a book about cloud computing for lawyers to my our editor at the time, and that was approved. And so I wrote Cloud Computing for Lawyers, which was published in 2012. And right about when that was coming out, I went, and at this point, I was also covering conferences as Legal Tech Press because of my blog and my writing. And I was going to skip Legal Week that year for a number of different reasons, but at the last minute, I was asked to speak for someone who had been sick. So I went there at the sort of last minute and decided to attend his press while I was there. And I met with the My Case guys, whom I'd met once before. And I met with them again, and they had a portal that had been built in that I had kind of overlooked initially that I was really impressed by. And so a couple weeks after the conference, they reached out to me to give me an actual demo of the product. And it was during that demo that they offered to hire me. At the time, it was sort of as a cloud evangelist, as an employee of My Case, who helped lawyers understand the benefits of the cloud because my book was coming out and I was already talking about that. And at the time, I was employee number one, and it was me and the three founders. And from there, My Case was acquired 6 months later by Appfolio, and we were there for 8 years. Then during the pandemic, there was called a carve out. The My Case business was sold um, by Appfolio to a private equity company during the pandemic. And so for 18 months, we were owned by a private equity company. And during that time, we acquired DocketWise, CasePeer, um, Woodpecker, Soluno. I feel like I'm missing something. And then in 2022, we were acquired by FiniPay, which is all of us were. No, My
Yep.
Case is
Everybody
yeah.
got in there.
And FiniPay is the parent company of LawPay, which almost everyone in the industry knows. And so it's been really exciting, and it's been a really interesting um, ride. And it's not where I ever thought my career would be, but I love it. And I continue to do those same types of things at Affinipay. I also, my title's now Principal Legal Insight Strategist, and I provide a lot of insight internally to different teams, like sometimes the product or product marketing teams. And sometimes I'll do presentations internally. I also work very closely with the marketing team. I write our legal industry report. And then I continue to externally educate lawyers about the intersection of law and tech from my ABA journal column, Above the Law column, Daily Record column, and I speak at conferences all the time as well. So it's great. I love what I do, and I like to sort of be right at the intersection of law and tech, both with lawyers externally and then internally within the company.
Actually, that's how I discovered you. So the column of Above the Law is where I discovered you and your story, and then I started looking into more of your background and kind of where you came from, and it was very intriguing on because even though we went on totally different paths, I feel like we both have been thrown into whatever it is that we're doing. We just naturally just geared to this path. It wasn't a path that I at all paved, but I did see myself as an independent, company, but I just didn't know exactly where I wanted to go with it. And like you said, people started coming up to me, my LinkedIn blew up, the podcast got popular, and you're right. You get these offers, you get these meetings, you get to go to places that normal legal professionals are not there unless you know someone and, things like that. So I'm really, that's kind of what interested me. And I didn't know all the background of how My Case became, affinity and all that. So thank you. I appreciate that. I attend all the workshops that I can. And so I try to stay on top of everything. And yeah, I appreciate your work. I have to say that. I mean, you do a lot for the legal industry. And even though I know it's for lawyers and everything else, I mean, everybody that's not a lawyer can benefit because we have to see both sides of the coin, right? So we have to understand each other in order to work with each other. And as a consultant, I use that information a lot because I personally have never been a lawyer, right? So I'm trying to understand the lawyer mindset and where they're coming from so that we can really meet in the middle and create something magical for their law firm to scale and grow and do all the things that lawyers want when they open up their law firm. And that's really what really I tapped into with your columns and your books and everything. And I'm a bookworm, love books. Everybody knows that. I'm totally for it. So let's actually talk about that. Let's talk about, you talked a lot about bridging, right? And that's what we love to do. We like to bridge and really close in those gaps that we have in the legal industry, which unfortunately there are a lot of them, but little by little we're getting there. People like you and me and everybody else that's been on the podcast, we do a lot of that. So, but you in particular, you actually geared to bridging the lawyers with tech. And I spoke to you before we started recording. There's a lot of fear around that, right? Just like before, we're always going into new territory, right? And lawyers I know in particular are super hesitant, whether it's because of the guidelines that ABA has to offer, whether it's because their own fears and their own personal, they just want to do it their way and that's it, right? So we get a lot of pushback sometimes when we're trying to kind of say, hey, no, there's a light at the end of the tunnel. This will make your life easier. And they're like, not about that life. And so I would say, I know AI has been around, legal tech obviously has grown for a long time. But I say right now we're in this new age, right? We're going into agentic AI, which is a whole different monster. We're going into a learning large language modules, all these things that are coming in and that we are all learning together, right? Because it's new, it's a new algorithm, even though it was based off an original one. For those of you that don't know what we're talking about, they just kind of topped it off and then they made it what it is now, what we would know as, well, I guess everybody knows what ChatGPT is at this point. So let's just, talk about that. But tell me kind of like with lawyers and legal professionals navigating through these, new, I guess, horizons, where can they start, right? Like, because there's a lot, right? There's a lot of options out there. There's a lot being thrown at them. And yes, we know that it can automate, it can be more efficient, we can, streamline the process, we can do all these things. But I often get a lot of people telling me, well, where do I start with all this? Like, how do I begin, right?
With
I hope you're enjoying this podcast episode so far, as this podcast is just the beginning. At Etarosa LLC, we specialize in helping law firms and legal teams thrive with tailored staff training, operations management, and team building solutions. Whether you're looking to streamline your practice or elevate your team's potential, we're here to help. So visit www.etarosallc.com. That's www.etarosallc.com. With AI, with
yeah, with
implementing and
AI, with AI,
bridging
yeah.
and doing all that. Yeah.
Well, I mean, first of all, I just want to mention that I do think of myself as the bridge. I will sometimes say lawyers, but between legal professionals and tech, right? So a lot of my articles are not just targeted to lawyers, paralegals, and uh, office managers. Like they're incredibly important both to the practice of law and also to the purchasing decisions of lawyers, right? Like their input oftentimes is really important because they're the ones using the software just as much as the lawyers. And so getting everybody on board is really important, not just the lawyers. And lawyers are not the one necessarily the ones that are the foundation of law practices either. I understand that perfectly well too. So, but with artificial intelligence and generative AI in particular, what I tend to tell the whenever I speak at conferences, I tend to suggest that what people should do is just dive into ChatGPT. You don't even need to get an account anymore. Um, but I usually suggest they get ChatGPT Plus. Just pay $20 for a month, and then you can go in there and you can actually in the settings turn off the training. But with or without the training turned off, what I typically recommend is, first of all, just don't put any confidential information in there right away until you've fully vetted the software. But for purposes of just trying Chat GPT out, um, you should plan to use it for 2 weeks. And what I think, and what I think people should think of Chat GPT or generative AI in general as, it's just like an assistant that like sits on your shoulder, and it's really, really smart, not very experienced, really wants to make you happy and give you the answer you need, and sort of has a pathological lying problem. So you need to keep all those things in mind, but then think of it as just this indispensable assistant. And whenever there's a, whether in your personal or professional life, a time when you're like, oh, I don't really want to deal with that right now, I'm going to put it on the back burner because I don't know what to say or how to deal with or what my plan of action is, that's when you should ask yourself, can I use ChatGPT to get this off my virtual desk right now? And 95% of the time, the answer is going to be yes. So, what I think that you need to do is um, you have your ChatGPT, you have it pulled up in a separate tab or whatever, and whatever that particular issue is, you run it by ChatGPT or you ask it to draft something for you. Without, I'm just going to put that caveat up there again. Don't input any confidential information at this point, but you can ask it to draft an email. If you have a really difficult client, let it know. This is a really challenging client. I don't want to sound argumentative. I want to give the information, make it an empathetic tone, but a firm tone. And or you can draft, this is what I want to say to them, fix it so that it's a little more empathetic and firm. But so you can do that again without, I'm just going to keep that caveat tapped up here. Don't put tacked up here. Don't put confidential information in. But you can have it draft a demand letter. You can have it draft a pleading, create templates for intake on a personal injury case in your firm that everybody uses. You can help it walk you through. One of the things a lot of lawyers have a hard time with is, how do we even get this done in my firm? I don't even know how to figure out how to streamline the process because I don't even know what the process is. And this often comes into play, like my case has workflows built in, but you have to understand your workflow before you can create the workflow for a certain task. And people will hire consultants because they can't think through all the steps and they miss some of them. ChatGPT can be that consultant. Talk me, you are the consultant. You talk me through and help me figure out what our firm's process is for this. And it'll help you create the step-by-step process that you can then get a better handle on for my case or any other tool that does this, that helps you create these workflows. So there's just so many ways. And then like in your personal life, what will this wine go with my dinner? What wine do you recommend? Or I need to write a um, somebody, what's the word? The what do you call a letter when someone's died and you want a note to tell them you're sorry? Why am I having a mind blank? What's that called?
Um, I
Why
mean,
can't
I don't know what
condolence,
they're
a
called.
condolence letter or email? It can makes beautiful ones. I'm telling you, like it'll come up with beautiful instead of may they be in your memories. It'll come up with something really beautiful and specific. And it sounds cheesy, but people actually really do appreciate. They've appreciated when I've sent them those, and I've actually gotten responses about how sweet it was. So it sounds silly, but there's a lot of ways you can use it, and you just need to dive in and test it out and see how it's going to fit into your practice and your specific needs. And I think you'll find that it becomes this indispensable little kind of clueless assistant in some ways. But
Yeah, I love that. And I obviously never put confidential information or identifiable information. We don't want to bridge the gap bridge that gap.
yeah, yeah,
It's learning, like you said. I always call it like my little toddler. It's a toddler. It's gonna lie to me sometimes. I always verify, clarify all the things. I love the images that it does for me as well. So when maybe you're trying to do a blog or you're trying to do an article or you're trying to do social media and you're trying to boost up your presence because you're trying to get more clients in but you can't afford to invest in marketing, it does that for you too. So content creation, it creates beautiful images. The more specific you are, the better. So I wrote this article. It's called "You're Only as Good as Your Prompt." And because sometimes if you're not specific enough or you leave out details, or maybe you have like a specific, like for me anyway, our content is very specific, very branded. So I always tell it the colors to use, and I always tell it to make sure that you have this image in there all the time, and then it'll update the memory and it'll do all the things and everything. And yeah, so it's really cool. Anyway,
well, one
so
thing I do
moving.
want to add really quickly too, though, is that's like how to get started with generative AI. But then, if you're going to use it in your practice, you really need to choose legal specific software. And
Yeah.
What I typically recommend people do is reach out to the companies the software you're already using. Reach out to those companies, find out what their plans are, because almost everyone's rolling AI out. Find out what their roadmap looks like. Find out if there's already tools there, and then ask them the questions. There's certain questions you need to do to vet them in terms of their AI. I have a list on uh, up on a website of mine, but you need to just vet them and understand the who, what, when, where, and why of how they're handling your firm's data when it relates to AI. But find out what their plans are because you already have a relationship with those companies. Presumably, you trust them. That's why you're using them. And then once you understand what they're going to be doing or what's already available to you there, figure out what the gaps might be and how can you fill those gaps in with other types of preferably legal specific software because those are companies you trust because those are companies that understand your ethical obligations and your workflows and just lawyers and law firms and how they work in general. But so, ChatGPT is a great way to sort of understand the potential really quickly and cheaply. But then you really want to make sure that you're using legal specific software for all the reasons I mentioned. I mean, I really think that that's ultimately going to be the way that you are going to be using these tools. And it's going to be built in. It's already getting built into most of these tools to start with. So,
Yeah, absolutely. Use the tools you already have, right? Why are you reinventing the wheel? Ask for demos, ask for training. They provide all that. You're paying for it. Might as well get the value of it as well. So, and have your whole team. Have
right.
your whole team come into the training and the demo. Make sure that you're all on the same page so that you can properly implement these new policies and compliance. I love
Really
that.
important to get the buy-in of everyone that's going to be using it, not just the lawyers that make those decisions. Because if your paralegal hates it, or if the office administrator or your administrative assistant hates it, then not only is it going to be hard to get them to train on it, it's going to be hard to get them to use it, right? You want to get everyone's buy-in, and you want to make sure you have the training rolled out in a way that they've already bought into the idea and they're sold on the software, and then fully train them on it. Like you said, it's super important to make sure
Yeah,
you have that
because
buy-in.
we love to do all the bells and whistles, but if nobody's gonna do it, then what's the point?
Right, for sure.
Right? Like, what are you doing it for? I love that. And other than the blogs, obviously you do a lot of speaking engagements. Tell me how you got into all that. Like, how did you just like went from writing to like, let me just talk everywhere. Let me go here, ABA, do all the things.
Well, I mean, initially what happened was actually it was interesting. I was I wrote articles for a couple articles for the local bar association, but they were at the time not very technologically forward thinking. And so I actually started to get asked to speak nationally before I got asked to speak a lot locally. And now I speak often locally. But
Interesting.
the New York State Bar was one of the first, I think it was the first uh, association or organization to ask me to speak, and it was actually very memorable speaking. And I'm surprised I ever spoke again after this because I hadn't spoken. I think I'd spoken once before this because I was a young attorney, and you aren't usually asked to speak a lot as a young attorney. And so when I got back into after I'd taken a couple of years off for work for my kids, um, I'd only spoken like at one sale at that point before I'd taken time off, right, as an attorney. And so when the New York State Bar asked me to speak, it was on about blogging for lawyers. And there's a good lesson to be learned in this situation. So I was in New
Uh-oh.
York and I was on a panel, and I was on a panel with someone who is um, a really well-known attorney now, who's currently in really hot water. I won't say who it is because I'm going to tell you what this person did to me, and they almost made me cry during the panel. um,
Oh no.
but this person now is like making national headlines and has some criminal
Mm.
charges against him. But it was just during and I was so nervous. It was like the New York State Bar's annual meeting, and there were probably 400, 300 lawyers in the audience. I'd never
Oh.
spoken to an audience that large either. And someone asked me directly a question after we had all three or four people on the panel given our little spiels and talked. And I had a pen in my hand, and I think I was clicking it. Like I was clicking it out of a nervous habit, and I didn't even notice I was doing it. In mid sentence, this person reached over, grabbed my hand, and took the pen out of my hand. And I
What?
was so shocked. It like felt like an assault, and I had a really hard time. I finished talking, but then whenever I wasn't speaking, all I could do was replay it in my head and think that everybody saw it. Even though in retrospect there was like a panel, and I'm not sure if anyone, very few people actually saw it. But I was so upset and I was so embarrassed, and it was like he'd reprimanded me publicly. and I barely made it through it without like I had tears in my eyes. It was awful. And
Mm.
so
That's horrible.
it was awful. And so I am surprised I ever spoke again after that because it was really one of the worst experiences of my life. But I did. And I have spoken hundreds of times since then, and I get paid to speak. And it's, and I love to speak. I used to love doing jury trials, and I get that same kind of high that you get, dopamine high, kind of, when you are speaking to a group of lawyers, and I love it. Um, and from that, after that, people just because I was writing. And everyone talks and they get other people, she did a great job, and so then they ask you, and so it just kind of builds on itself, and it's kind of like what you'd alluded to previously. I think that what people don't understand is if you just put yourself out there and start making connections, opportunities come your way, and sometimes when you least expect it, and it's just a matter of being willing to put yourself out there on social media and share your opinions and be honest and be relatable, and it makes a really big difference.
I think so too. One of our like I guess highest ratings of our episodes or a social media, post or whatever it is, it's when we resonate with a lot of people. So we're actually having a bonus episode on one of the posts that almost I always say broke LinkedIn because every time it's like over 60,000 impressions. Like it's probably our biggest post, and it was one of those, I'm literally in my car and I look at this comment that was left in my YouTube channel. And I was like, I was very non-biased about it because I understand that the paralegal role is different, right? In every country and even state and jurisdiction, right? A lot of lawyers use their paralegals very different. So as that person, right, as that sociologist, I put my sociology hat on and I said, okay, they could be from a different country. Maybe that's not the experience they had. Maybe that's why they're saying this. But they use the word side gig. And that triggered me for some reason.
Yeah.
I don't know what it was. You can have your opinion, but that's a very tough pill to swallow. And
Like
so
the
I was,
paralegals were
you know,
sidekicks? Is that what?
yeah, that paralegals are, the career, it should be like a side gig because all they do is administrative tasks. And now with technology, actually, this ties into our conversation. Now with technology, they're basically going to dissolve that, role or position. And I was a little like offish, like I was like, oh my goodness, like how do I and I went to ChatGPT and I said, how do I respectfully like decline this and
Right.
this and that and the whole thing? And still be empathetic and understanding, but like firm, like you were saying, right? Because I honestly I had so many emotions going in my head. Like I understand, that the paralegal world is different, and I understand that, other countries see it other ways. But it's like that, for me, it's like I built my whole business on my because of my paralegal career. I have 5 degrees under my belt. And, for me, it was a very fulfilling career. I loved working primarily with the community, right? Because we're community builders, we serve our communities, and that's what I loved about the legal industry, and that's what drew me in, right? Because I'm very for the people, by the people. I'm super, into, help your neighbor. Like that's just how I was raised. So this was like a perfect career choice for my personality and my values and everything else. And so for somebody to like say that, I'm just like, what? And here my daughter's like, I want to be a lawyer just like my mom. And I'm trying to explain to her, mommy's not a lawyer. And, things like that. And I'm having this whole conversation and then I see this post and I'm just like, oh my goodness, or this comment. And I went and I just posted
Mm.
about it and I was like, what do you guys think? So many responses that we're literally creating an entire bonus episode on it because it was so it was a very unifying post, right? Because everybody can relate to it, right? Like everybody can either have a say in it or not, or say I agree with it or not agree with it or whatever. And it was a very much a conversational starter, and it was like you said, it was honest, it was genuine, it was something that, like, well, maybe it's just me. Maybe I'm the one that's reading this wrong or interpreting it wrong. And so it was nice to see that our community came to battle
Yeah.
with this one. And so we're definitely creating a whole episode on it, which I love. But you're right, connection, community, and technology does that for us. Technology unifies us in a way that we never used to have it before. We used to have payphones and carry quarters in our pocket, when that was the way that we got to say, "Hey, mom, I made it to the bus stop," or "I'm home now," from the home phone. And we were just having that conversation last night with the kids, and the kids are looking at me like, "What is a home phone?" And I'm like, "Oh my goodness." I have spoiled these kids. But with technology at our fingertips is very different. And so bridging that gap is really going to be um, beneficial for us, but also generational differences, right? So I don't know if you deal with this when you're speaking. And I know for me anyway, for me, it's not more of a generational, like the generation that you grew, like whatever, like Gen X or millennial or whatever it is. For me, it's more what you surrounded yourself with, right? So my friends, my family, they call me an old soul because my parents had me later on in life. My mom was 36 when she had me. And back then, that was old. Oh my gosh, you were ancient. You were like crazy if you had kids over 30 or whatever it was. And so my mom had me, and so they were older. They were always older. And so I was an only child between them, and I kind of like saw that behavior. They were older, their careers were done. Like they didn't have to worry about struggling with their career because they already had their career. They already did everything, all the struggles, everything were basically almost out the way, right? When it comes to like financial stuff, right? And so I saw that. I saw that my mom was very sure of herself and didn't really go through the what typical, moms go through, whatever it is. And so it was very different for me. But anyway, I veered off. What my question to you was, when you do go to the speaking engagements, obviously you had that mishap, but I want to know more about how you were just like, "I'm going to go back, and I'm doing it. I'm not going to let that bother me." And I feel like sometimes that's not really the normal, right? Because a similar thing happened to me when I was in the panel, and they didn't grab my pen or anything. It was virtual, so they couldn't touch me. But yeah, I was the only female in the panel, and I was, I have my points, I have my thoughts, and I said them, and I stayed in my lane. Again, I'm not a lawyer, so I can't speak on that. But the question again was directed to me, and I did my 2 points. And all of a sudden, I get pushback from another panelist, which is fine. It's healthy. That's the point. You have a panel. And then I get another pushback, and then another. And I felt like I was getting attacked, right? And I was like, "Whoa, like, what's going on here?" And so it was, and I just felt a certain way. And I was like, "I don't know if I want to be on a panel anymore because this is crazy. Like, why are they doing that? Why are they were trying to talk over me and trying to interrupt me, which is a big no-no, right? When you're on a panel, you want to let the person finish or signify that you want to go next or whatever the case may be. And so I felt like attacked. And I was just like, okay, I'm not going to let that mindset bother me, right? Because I know my worth. I know that I have value in this conversation. And I know that whoever I'm going to resonate with, I'm going to resonate with, right? And thankfully, we got 3 contracts out of that, out of that presentation, which was the point, right? The point, another point is that you want to promote yourself and put yourself out there and get business out of it. And so, it was great. But I was really doubting myself. Like I had this doubt, and I was having this conversation with my husband later on that day, and I was just like, I don't know how I feel about this. Like it was just that one person out of the whole panel, and they kept going and going and going. And then, like at the end, they acted like nothing was wrong. And I was like, okay, maybe that's just who they are. Like, I don't know, right? Like, I'm just trying to figure it out. And I was like, okay, I'm not going to let my thoughts or my stories that I create in my head really hinder me from taking another opportunity like this. And have you ever felt like that? Where, well, obviously you had that incident, but have you ever felt like that? Like maybe not unwelcomed, but like attacked or undermined, or somebody asked you like a weird question? Because I've had that before too.
Well, I think that, I mean, it's an interesting question. So I think that lawyers, and this is something my husband's had to get used to over the years, what lawyers can think of as a uh, debating or discussing can sound incredibly argumentative to other people. Um, so I think sometimes that happens, but other times I think that uh, male lawyers can, and I've certainly experienced this, can, I don't think they don't necessarily realize they're doing it, but they do talk over women more, they interrupt them more. And I think a combination of wanting to have a heated discussion or a lively discussion and their tendency to want to make their point, they can barrel over people. And it's even harder on Zoom, I think. I tend to interrupt people on Zoom a lot, I think more than I do in real life because of the delays and because um, I don't know. For some reason, I feel like I do it more on Zoom. I try not to, and I try to just mute myself so that it's harder for me to do it. But it's definitely it can definitely be challenging sometimes. But I don't think that I feel like in the professional world, like in the legal tech world, it's the place where it happens to me the least. And I find it happening to me a lot more when I'm just with my husband somewhere and people don't know who I am or they're not part of that world. So the respect that I've earned or I don't know if recognition is the word, but the presumption that I'm competent is that's what this is one of the only places where I get that. Do you know what I mean? And then when you go out into the world anywhere else, there's a presumption you're not competent. So I think there's some of that as well. I mean, it can be, and I get mad more with strangers at conferences. So sometimes I'll be with my press friends. I'm like, did you see what that person said to me? I'm like, I don't know. It didn't seem like a big deal. I'm like, no, he was a jerk. I'm like, well, all right, Nikki. Like they're used to it. So I definitely get like a little huffy about stuff. I think less when I'm speaking and more just when I'm out with other people. But it does happen for sure.
Yeah, and that dynamic I feel is interesting. It was the first time it ever happened to me. Well, it was my first time on a panel too, so I guess maybe that was kind of, the difference as well. And yeah, I don't know. I just felt kind of like stay, and then I get it. The more your platform grows and the more, out there you are, right? Because I guess that was the whole point of my conversation is like the more you put yourself out there, the more accessible you are, right? To anyone at that point, to any thought process, to any mindset, any cultural difference, anything like that. So it's something that I'm personally navigating through now.
Hmm.
And it's funny enough, I'm in the middle of finishing my book that's called Silent Burdens, and it's about secondary trauma and the mindset that the legal professional goes through with recreating stories. And so for their clients. And it's funny because I'm like, this is something that we need to talk about. This is, we go through this and we don't understand it. And then we start like doubting ourselves for some reason, or we're up at night trying to figure out that case. And so we're not knowing why. So it's a lot of things happening. But when
Another,
I was
yeah.
tapping into that.
Yeah. Well, another thing I think that
Right.
probably happens that you might experience is law firms are super hierarchical and it's
Oh,
lawyers and everybody else and it's the partners and then the associates and everyone else or whatever the other, of counsel and but what lawyers are super hierarchical. And so I think that might be something that you encounter too is because you're not a lawyer, because you're a paralegal, they are also going to be more inclined to talk down to you. So I think it's a little bit more of a upward battle for you to and especially if they don't know where you're coming from or who you are, then that might present a challenge too. So I can imagine that's a battle you have to fight often.
oh, you know what? It's a battle I'm gonna win because you bet they're gonna know me by the time they get into that room.
Yeah, yeah, right. I think
I'm
it'll
up for the
help. I think it'll
challenge.
help. Yeah, for sure.
Thank you, Nikki. And then once I get there, I'm gonna be like, I have to thank Nikki Black for this motivation. Oh my God, it was so fun. Thank you so much. I could talk to you all day. I feel like you can talk about anything at this point. I threw so many random questions at you, and I love that you just went with it. So thank you for humoring me and humoring my audience. They're used to it because I go off on a rampage all the time. So thank you guys for sticking with me for 4 years now. I appreciate you. I appreciate your time. I know it's super valuable, and I know it's super, I guess, finite, right? Because you have to do 5 million things all the time. So I appreciate you carving out some time and joining us on the Let's Talk Paralegal podcast. And I hope this is not the end. I hope our relationship continues off the platform, and I appreciate you. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much for asking me. This was a lot of fun.